Greetings and welcome to Robin's Book Club, episode number 53. Something a little bit different today. You can possibly see the stand of my microphone in the shot. I normally put on the voice afterwards, record my thoughts after I've made the actual video. But today we're going to try and do everything at the same time. What could possibly go right? This is episode number 53 of Robin's Book Club, and it's just going to be something a little bit different. I had the COVID, and so didn't have any videos for a couple of weeks, and I've kind of been catching up on some reading and some thinking about things. And one of the things that I've been thinking about is the different kinds of photography books which we don't often cover on this channel, which are, shall we say, the more instructional, educational ones. We do it from time to time. Anyway, so I thought here we have a little selection of four. So we got David Hurn and Bill J on being a photographer, which we'll get on to. Daido Moriyama, how I take photographs. David Campany on photographs. And the new kid on the block, Stephen Shaw, Modern Instances, The Craft of Photography, a memoir. And this was the one which kind of sparked the whole thing, because I got this the week it came out, which was only a couple of weeks ago at the time of making this video. And it's actually sort of quite an expensive book, but it broadly falls within the range of books that we're looking at today. So why don't we start with David Hurn and Bill J on being a photographer. So this book, as you can see, quite a small book, and I think I'm right in saying no photographs inside. Let's just have a look. Yeah, 0 photographs inside. So this is not a book of pictures. This is a book which teaches you, or at least allows you to have a think about what photography is. So they go through definitions and subjects and shooting the single picture, creating contacts. It's sort of a step-by-step guide to thinking about photography. So they say that it's a 30-year celebration of friendship and dialogue about photography. And if you follow David Hurn on Instagram, which I strongly suggest you should do if you don't, he very often posts photographs which have quite a lot of text. So he'll post a photograph, which is always a brilliant photograph. He is one of the greats. And then there'll be something quite thoughtful underneath and thought-provoking. So I find him to be an absolute legend. He was, of course, famously involved in photographic education for a long time. But as you can see, this is just writing a conversation, a dialogue between two people who really know photography very well indeed, and some thoughts for you that you might be able to take away from it. So here they're discussing the nature of documentary photography and, what that really means. The only factually correct aspect of photography is that it shows what something looked like under a very particular set of circumstances. But that is not the same as the underlying truth of the event or situation. As to objectivity in photography, it does not exist. In my own photography, I have 2 fundamental controls: where I stand and when I press the button. Both are very subjective choices, so the end result, the picture, is bound to be equally subjective. And it goes on like this. So this is, definitions of what photography is. They talk about, this is just another good quote here. When I talk about the picture or photographic essay, I mean a group of images in which each picture is supporting and strengthening all the others. Not that the sequencing of the pictures can be read like a string of words, which is really fascinating, because I think we often get hung up, don't we, on sequencing. If we have a whole load of photographs in a story, we're trying to tell, again, stories within photography. It's really interesting. They kind of get into all of this in this book. But if you have a sequence of photographs, does it read like a novel? Do you start at the beginning and read to the end? Is it, sequential? And very often the answer is no. The sequencing of the pictures cannot be read like a string of words, is David Hurn's suggestion there. There's one brilliant quote which I'm sure I won't be able to find just by flicking through, because as you can see, it's quite a lot underlined in this book, and I'd certainly recommend it to you if you're looking to kind of think about photography a bit more at the moment. But he talks about the reasons for projects, which cameras, shoes and other essentials. It's important to have the right equipment for the purpose at hand, which is compatible with your own personality. It is possible to insert a screw with a hammer, but the job is a lot more efficient with a screwdriver, preferably a power driver. So they're going to talk about that. Let me just see whether I can find where it might be, but they're talking about 47. So it's selecting a subject, and they're kind of talking about the impetus for projects. So this is David Hurn and Bill J's suggestions on about how you might select a subject which you might make a project about. It comes down to the choice of subject. The photographer must have intense curiosity, not just a passing visual interest in the theme of the pictures. This curiosity leads to intense examination, reading, talking, research, and many, many failed attempts over a long period of time. He then talks about how, when he was working in the education sector running these courses, how people come to them with their choice of subject matter. Bill J suggests that every time a student proposes a topic for research, it is a book-length theme, not an article. The difficulty is to encourage a small, specific, doable project. So if somebody suggested doing Victorian portraiture, he might suggest Lewis Carroll's Images of Alice. They might suggest the photo secession. They suggest the use of glass balls as a motif. So absolutely fantastic, full of what I'm going to call down-to-earth, practical, good advice. So this, if you like reading about photography, this is a fantastic book. Been published many, many times, and it's available pretty cheaply. So yeah, definitely check out David Hurn and Bill J on being a photographer. Completely different to Daido Moriyama's How I Take Photographs. Let's turn to Daido Moriyama's How I Take Photographs then. His book, very different from David Hurn and Bill J. On the back, we see it says, "Take a walk with legendary photographer Daido Moriyama while he explains his groundbreaking approach to street photography." Okay, so probably, well, look, we can see similar size, similar cost, very different approach. We have photographs, and actually we have quite a lot of photographs. So in here we have a guide to snapshot photography, and then we have locations. So 5 different locations, and then, intriguingly, the real Daido Moriyama at the end, as presumably these location photographs were fake Daido Moriyama. Right, now I'm going to see whether I can do this. I should be able to, shouldn't I? Shouldn't be beyond my capabilities, so we'll go there. So look, this is photographs and text. So we have here in this is what I like. I like guides, I like information, I like text, and these little bits here. Well, the first thing I always tell anyone who asks me for advice is get outside. So Moriyama is going to tell you you have to have desire. The desire the photographer must feel, and actually this is what David Hurn and Bill J was saying, wasn't it? The desire the photographer must feel in the instant he takes the shot. If you don't have desire, you won't see what's there. I'm talking about the desire you feel in that moment when you see something that compels you to take your shot. So he is talking about sort of snapshot photography, and it is quite an interesting style that he has, isn't it? And we get these contact sheets as well, which I like. So we're going to go through, the locations. So here he's talking about what it was like, the shopping street as training ground. So he's talking us through. One thing I would recommend your readers to do is take shots, lots of shots, of any regular journeys they may make in your life. So he's talking about how you develop projects, how you come up with ideas, how you find material. Sometimes we think, we need to travel halfway around the world to find material. No, go about your regular journey. And actually one of our course leaders on the course that I'm doing, who is a professor of photography based in Japan, but from the UK, he is massively into rephotography. Gary McLeod's his name. You should look him up on Instagram because he'll photograph on his journeys over and over again, and then he'll plan specific journeys to go and rephotograph the same places over and over again. So rephotography is a really interesting thing, and he is super into it. So this is a very different book to your to the first book that we looked at. Ginza, a debut in digital photography. Some years ago, I asked Moriyama what he thought of digital cameras. I haven't made up my mind, he told me, but right now I get the sense that photography is moving away from things you can feel in the hand, photographic film, chemicals and so on, and becoming simply an electronic tool. Does that matter? Is that something that you're interested or not interested in? We have a lot of people today who are sort of obsessed with the kind of the hipster mentality, the fact that analog is best and film is better than... we're so over this whole argument of which is best. Just use whichever you want for whatever you want. So if the project that you're currently working on demands an approach of film, black and white film, say, use it. And then if you want to go out and document something with your mobile phone after that, do that. I do tend to find that personally I stick to kind of one format per project, but other people will mix up colour and black and white within the same project, and they might mix up film and mobile phone. That anything is possible, but you just kind of got to have your reasons and your decisions, and you've got to kind of think about what you're doing. And a book like this, as you can see, lots of examples, lots of photographs, lots of good ideas being dished out, okay? And we can see what Moriyama's photography is about, perhaps, from these photographs. And then we can have some instruction and some direction. Location 5, highway, and again, your contact sheet. So this is great. If you want to learn a bit about what Daido Moriyama thinks about photography, this would be a very good book to do that. So let's put that one to one side for now and move on. And we'll have to do some zooming again. Right, so David Campany on photographs. This is fascinating. This is, I think, personally, a really good book. RRP, £25. As you can see, decent size, decent kind of hardback cover, nice production values. In the introduction, we get this amazing story about how he met Susan Sontag, whose book, famously on photography, is one of these kind of recommended set texts. Yeah, okay, sure, if you want to, but you don't have to. You definitely don't have to. But he met her, and there's this bit where he kind of explains that she gave him the title of this book. Which is just, absolutely bizarre in that sense. Yeah, really, really strange how that came about. But I think he writes really, really well. So this is just from the introduction. While there may be something perfectly singular about any individual photograph, our visual culture is defined by numbers. Photographic images are reproducible and often have no original. They can exist in many places at the same time, be seen by many people, and they belong wherever they are placed, be it wall, page or screen. Just as importantly, photographs are rarely made to be encountered on their own. Sets, series, sequences, photo essays, typologies, projects, albums, archives, folders, feeds. Photography is almost unimaginable outside of one kind of grouping or another. Which is then really interesting because he then puts, you'll see the photographs, right? So this is the format for the book. We have one photographer, one photograph, and some description of the photograph and that point of photographic history. So, for example, here we have Robert Cumming, 1826, Niepce's pewter picture, 1980. The oldest surviving photograph made with a camera dates from 1826. And we have some discussion here, and Campany is a very, very good writer, very intelligent, very considered, but very easy to understand. He's not artificially flamboyant with language for no reason. He kind of gets to the point really well. And as you can see, I've sort of been through this and highlighted bits that I've enjoyed. Photography's past lives on in the minds of those to whom it means something, and in meaning something, it remains contemporary. So we have this whole selection of different, so Lee Friedlander, for example. I can't obviously stop on every page to talk about them, but Akshay there'll be photographers that you're very familiar with, William Klein, and this amazing fashion photography, which is both fashion photography and not fashion photography at the same time. Guy Bourdain. So yeah, so you'll have these amazing photographs and photographers and description of them. Some you'll know very well, some you might not have heard of before, some will really resonate with you for particular reasons. So this was not a photographer that I was aware of, John Stezaker. I'm not sure on the pronunciation, sorry John. But Campany writes, it is in the nature of images, all images, to misbehave and to exceed meaning in ways that are anarchic, elusive, enigmatic and ambiguous. This is why images are so often accompanied by words that tame and stabilise them. Essentially, however, they remain wild and therefore have always been a source of great fascination and great suspicion. So if you wanted to kind of have like a bit of an overview of the history of photography in a way and different concepts of photography and different artists, this is a fantastic book. David Campany on photographs, like absolutely 100% recommend it. Eggleston there. Ruth Orkin. Don't know Ruth Orkin, but an amazing photograph. American Girl in Italy, 1951, and some brilliant writing about it and everything which is going on within this photograph. I'm just going to try, because there's, look, you can see hundreds, probably not hundreds, a good number of photographs and a good number of photographers. I was kind of making notes on this for various photography projects that I was involved with for university. Let's just see what we got here. Oh, look at this. Mishka Henna, Coronado Feeders, Dalhart, Texas, 2012. Okay, so what's going on here? It's amazing. On the 7th of December 1972, a photograph was taken of Earth by the crew of the Apollo 17 spacecraft as it made its way to the moon. Seen as a whole against the blackness of deep space, the planet looked perfect and harmonious. The image became known as the Blue Marble, and it remains one of the most widely reproduced photographs. This is skip to the end. Exploring Google Earth, Henner came across areas of land in the United States that are used for the intensive rearing of cattle. Grids of rectangular pens hold the cows. Silos mix up the grain for feed. There are tracks for trucks to deliver the feed, and there are giant ponds for the cattle's feces and urine. It is a hyper-rationalised system designed to extract the most profit from the least resources and the least land. So this is Google Earth, and it's actually dealing with some pretty interesting issues in terms of ethics, in terms of the economy, in terms of the environment, and actually just in terms of the visual world. Henner exhibits the work as large-scale photographs. The shift in context and presentation produces a shift in perception and understanding. Although these sites were there to be seen on Google Earth, Henner's gesture was enough to draw considerable attention to them. So in other words, people hadn't seen this. You wouldn't see this at ground level. Now maybe with drones, perhaps, we're seeing these kind of views more often. But there's something very, I don't want to say perfect, but there is something very precise about the overhead Google image. There doesn't seem to be any distortion to perspective or anything like that. You just get what seemingly is a very straight, very flat image. Many Americans simply did not realise that this was how their beef was reared. Of all Henner's projects to date, this one has reached the widest audience. His exhibitions of the work generated intense interest and discussion online, which is where the artist derived the Google Earth images in the first place. So again, we're talking about the online world versus the physical world. Really interesting concepts, lots to think about. The feedlots had been hiding in plain sight. So absolutely recommend this book to you. It's the sort of thing that you can dip in and out of. You can read about Don McCullin. You can read about all sorts of people. Brassai, and I mean, I don't know. I just think this is a bit of a treasure trove, to be honest, this one. So thoroughly recommend that. And then finally, we did talk about Stephen Shaw being kind of the impetus for this particular video. Because I actually picked this up just a couple of weeks ago when it was firstly published. So it was quite expensive. I think it was about £30. But it's not the first book he's written by any stretch of the imagination. We'll come back to some of his older ones a little bit later on in the year, a couple of weeks' time maybe. But I just wanted to have a quick look at this. Stephen Shaw, Modern Instances. So we have lots of writing and thoughts, and actually a conversation in the style of the David Hurn and Bill J conversation. And we have some of his great photographs as well, and some other people's photographs and other images. So he starts off by saying in the mid-90s he wrote The Nature of Photographs. We will come on to that one in another video. The theme of the book was that the physical attributes of photography, of its materials, equipment, prints or digital displays, forced the medium to translate the three-dimensional world flowing in time into a flat, static image. It defined the tools at a photographer's hand. Finally, the book describes how these choices affect our mechanisms of perceptions. He then explains what's different about this book. This book is a subjective scrapbook of thoughts and impressions, an impressionistic memoir. Writing this book has given me the impetus to reflect on the people, events and works of art that have impacted me and on how those impacts have been assimilated. First things first, if you want to know about Stephen Shaw, this is a great book, okay? So if you want to know about his life, his career, his photographs and his way of working and his impulses in working, this is really cool. And it is actually very cool because he's again, a good educator and a fantastic photographer. So you see, we're going to see these kind of classic photographs, but we're also going to hear him talking about how he took this one day and this another day, you know, and this is the same sort of concept, similar evolution of an idea over time. He's going to explain structure rather than composition. So he doesn't like the term composition in photographer. He thinks about structure. He's also going to talk a lot about Andy Warhol, okay? And he's going to talk a lot about how he kind of, from memory, having read this a couple of weeks ago, sort of dropped out of school perhaps, or at least didn't finish the top level of education in America and just kind of hung out at Andy Warhol's place in New York for months on end, for years and years, and then had a bit of a revelation. And the revelation was that he didn't want that to be his be-all and end-all. He didn't want to be the highlight of his career, was that he kind of hung out with Andy Warhol a bit when he was like a late teenager, early 20 years old. We have a conversation here, similar to the David Hurn and Bill J thing. So anyway, yeah. So he didn't want Andy Warhol to be the highlight of his life. So he knew he had to kind of move on and make his own way and do his own thing. As you can see, there is a lot of writing in this, but there's lots of photographs as well. he also talks, and this is really interesting because Joel Meyerowitz talks about the same idea, the same concept of kind of changing your equipment every so often. So if you want to have like a reinvigoration, then maybe you move from a 10x8 camera to a rangefinder, or a 35mm rangefinder or something like that. But you might keep changing up the way that you choose to make photographs. And here, look, in this section we have Shaw is taking us through some of his favourite artists. So, George Eliot. What is it about George Eliot? What is it about Herman Melville's Moby Dick? I mean, how do you think that relates to photography? But it does. And or at least it relates to Stephen Shaw's photography. So we kind of get there. Sculpture. Really interesting to read what he says about so many of these sort of photographic ideas, and how, I'll just read you some of this. J.S. Bach. I felt connected to Bach's music for more than 50 years. There are moments listening to some of his works that I feel as though I'm partaking in the very nature of consciousness. Okay, so he's not going to go into grand detail about how this relates to photography, okay, because this clearly in itself doesn't relate to photography, but the nature of consciousness, interesting. And then we have here a section about Shakespeare, and about how he used to go around just kind of like reciting Shakespeare. He'd memorize Shakespeare and recite it when he was going around. So, I don't know, fascinating stuff about the history of art, the history of photography, and what really makes Stephen Shaw tick. So I've presented there several different books, all roughly on the same kind of idea, and that idea being learning about photography, learning about art, inspiring yourself, and how you take that and put that into your own practice. And I think you would find that, this book would be good if you are, say, maybe more interested in education and intellectual thought. You like to think about photography. This book would be fantastic if you wanted to know about street photography, and specifically about how Moriyama works. If you're looking for like a general introduction to the history and the practice of photography over the last, 200 years, give or take now, isn't it? Then Campany's book is pure gold. And if you want to learn a bit more about Stephen Shaw and how he thinks and what his inspirations are, then this is a very decent book, if a little on the expensive side. Anyway, that's my book club for this week. Next time we'll be back to probably just looking at more of a photo book, but I hope you've enjoyed this episode. And there are affiliate links for all of these books in the description below.